In the words of Mr. Stokes, the float property is a valuable and powerful asset to any web designer or developer working with HTML and CSS. Tragically, it can also cause frustration and confusion if you don't fully understand how it works. We'll find out how important is the floats property and how incredibly useful it can be once you have mastered it. The very first and simple usage of the float property is wrapping text around an image. The image and text we are seeing in front of us right now are the default way in which image flows in line with the text. But in magazines and internet, we see text such that it is wrapping around an image. Let's see how to achieve this effect using CSS. Let's first define a class inside the image element with the name of float and write its definition inside our CSS file with the name of .float and give it a value of float left. We'll shortly see what does float left mean. Load into the browser, and now we see that the text is wrapping around an image instead of floating with it. And the difference can be seen when we see the two tabs individually. But there's a problem here. The text is sticking with the image and we don't want that. We want some breathing space between the text and image. And that can be achieved with the help of padding or margins around the image. So let's give some 5 pixel padding to our image. Padding 5 pixels. Save it and load into the browser. And here we go. Before, after. Although it has nothing to do with this video, but let's give 5 pixels of margins and a border as well to this image so that it looks even better. Margin 5 pixels, border 1 pixels solid, and let's give it a color of black. That's it. Now let's save and load into the browser. And here we go. The image is now looking much better than before, and also the text is not sticking with the image. It has some breathing space. Wrapping text around an image was one use of floats. Now let's see other uses of floats, but before seeing those uses, let's first understand what float is all about. And we begin exploring floats with its values. The float property has 4 values: left, right, inherit, and none. All these properties are pretty much self-explanatory. If you assign float left to an element, it will move to the leftmost boundary of its parent element. The same idea applies if you were to assign float right to an element. It will move to the rightmost boundary of its parent element. The inherit value tells an element to inherit the float value of its parent element. The value none is the default value and tells an element not to float at all. Now an important recall. How do block level elements normally behave? Just like the blocks we have in front of us, they stack on top of each other. Even if a block level element is 100 pixels wide, it would take up the entire width of the browser window, and the next element would begin right below it. Just like we have 4 blocks in front of us, there is a lot of space around the green box, but the boxes red, blue, and orange are all beginning on their own lines. But when we float a block level element, it gets out of the normal flow first and then goes as far to the left or right of the parent element depending upon the value of the float applied. In the case of this red box, it has been applied a value of float left, and it would float to the leftmost edge of its parent, but when it would encounter the green box, it would stick right to its edge. The same goes for the blue and orange box. In other words, when floated, the elements start sitting next to each other instead of stacking on top of each other. Although it sounds obvious, but it's very important to always keep in mind that floated elements will only be able to sit next to each other if there is enough room for them to do so. For example, if three blocks are 300 pixels side each and their parent is 800 pixels wide, they will not sit next to each other, even if they are all floated, just because there is not enough room. And keeping this behavior in mind is going to be really crucial in understanding how to build layouts of web pages. Here we have three block level boxes stacked on top of each other, and applying the float left value to all of these, they would sit next to each other. This is the HTML for these three blocks that we have just seen. All of them have been given IDs of red, green and blue. Although IDs can have any name, but we have given them the appropriate name so that it's easy to recognize what is what. And in the ID definitions, we have given them the background colors, again of red, green and blue, and each individual div has a class of block that is assigning them a width and height of 200 pixels. Alright. Now give each div a class of float. Again, when there are two classes, they are separated by a space. Let's define the class of float and give it a value of float left. This will cause the boxes to float to the left side of their container. Save it and load into the browser, and we see that now the boxes are sitting next to each other instead of sitting on top of each other. Okay, now let's increase the width from 200 to 600 pixels. Save it and load into the browser. And now we see that although the three blocks are floated left, and as a principle they should sit next to each other, but since there was not enough space for them to sit next to each other, the blue box ended up sitting below the red box, just because its width was greater than the width available next to the green box. Keeping this behavior in mind is going to be really crucial in understanding how to build layouts of web pages. Clear. And this is also known to web developers as the stepbrother of float, and the two complement each other in a way that should make you a happy coder. And there is just one and only one thing that you need to keep in mind that will help you not only understand the role of our stepbrother Clear, but also it will keep you from fighting with your real brother after you've spent hours and considering yourself perfect and blaming your computer when not getting your layout to work out correctly, and concentrating on your code word by word as if it's a thriller by Agatha Christie, and still not figuring out the bug. Oh Lord, the world's a horrible place. I just wanna die. Alright, that's enough. The point to keep in mind is that the block level elements that are below the floated elements behave a bit awkwardly. I repeat, the block level elements that are below the floated elements behave a bit awkwardly. And what's that awkwardness? That awkwardness is they do not behave as they should in the normal document flow. How do they behave then? Well, let's have a look. Suppose we have 4 blocks of 200 by 200 each. Here's how they look in the normal flow, stacked on top of each other. Let's float the first 2 blocks. Float the red and green blocks. 2 below them do not float. This is the definition of float. Save it and load into the browser. And voila. We have the 2 elements floated, and the 2 that are not floated are below them, but one of them has disappeared. This disappearance is the problem that is created when we have blocks that are after the floated elements. When the elements above are floated, the elements beneath them get confused because they do not take them as block level elements anymore. And To erase this confusion, we have something known as clear. Let's define the class of clear and give it a value of clear left, since the above elements have the value of float left. Give the blue div a class of clear, save it and load into the browser, and now the problem has solved. Now the blue and black box that are sitting below the floated red and green box are behaving normally, courtesy clear. And if we float the blue element to left, again the black box is having the same problem the blue box was having a moment ago with the red and green box. To erase its confusion as well, we'll just clear its head, and here we go. Now the black box is also behaving as it normally would in the normal document flow. And if we want the black box to sit next to blue box, we'll just remove the clear property and replace it with float, save it and load into the browser, and here we go. This is where we began and this is where we ended up. Alright guys, now I have reasons to believe that you understand float and its stepbrother clear. Because if you don't, oh well, life's really gonna be tough. And one more thing, no thanks for watching this time. Thank me instead. Thanks for watching.